Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. It's an absolute delight to be welcoming you to UCL to celebrate our bicentennial, 200 years since UCL was founded, an extremely important occasion for us all, and we're really keen and delighted to be celebrating our bicentennial with you. It's an absolute delight also to be welcoming you to the Human Rights Institute bicentennial annual lecture, the UCL Institute for Human Rights, which is an interdisciplinary institute in our university. My name is Virginia Mantouvalou. I'm a professor of human rights and labor law here in the law faculty at UCL, and I'm a co-director of the Human Rights Institute. It's a real honor for me to be introducing today's speaker, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, who is with us. Mr. Türk is the current United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and he took up his official functions as High Commissioner in 2022. He has devoted his long and distinguished career to advancing universal human rights, notably the international protection of some of the world's most vulnerable people, refugees and stateless persons. What's more important than that? Prior to this, Mr. Türk was the Under-Secretary General for Policy in the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General, where he coordinated global policy work. He also ensured UN system-wide coordination in the follow-up to the Secretary General's call to action for human rights. And his report, Our Common Agenda, which sets out a vision to tackle the world's interconnected challenges on foundations of trust, solidarity, and human rights. He previously served as Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. As Assistant High Commissioner for Protection in the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva, he played a key role in the landmark Global Compact for Refugees. Over the course of his career, he held a number of distinguished positions, including at the UNHCR headquarters, where he served as Director of the Division of International Protection, Director of Organizational Development and Management, and Chief of Section Protection Policy and Legal Advice. He has also served the UNHCR across the world, including as representative in Malaysia, Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Regional Protection Coordinator in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Kuwait. Mr. Türk also holds a doctorate in international law from the University of Vienna and a Master of Laws degree from the University of Linz in Austria. He has published widely on international refugee law and international human rights law. It's an absolute honor to welcome him today. He will give a lecture to us on a very important, very topical issue, people, power, and society in the age of AI. So, Mr. Türk, High Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Sorry. No, I should have put it in my pocket. Anyway, really great to be here. Thank you very much for the introduction, and also really great to be able to join you. And I have obviously a topic, as you know, but I also would like to say a few words before I start talking about the topic, about what we see in today's deepening global crisis. It is true that our world is becoming more dangerous because states and armed groups recklessly resort to violence to resolve their differences, trampling the laws of war and in particular international humanitarian law. And if we just watch what's happening in the Middle East, but in Sudan, in Myanmar, in Ukraine, it's clear that we need dialogue and negotiations towards peace, and all parties need to uphold international law. Of course, these proliferating conflicts are appalling in themselves, but I'm also very concerned about what I call the politics of distraction, because some of the long-term challenges that requires a lot of political energy are no longer dealt with. If you just look at the emergence of new technologies without guardrails, but also the climate crisis. And we need urgently more public debate, we need more political debate, and we really need a political momentum towards solutions, not just on the actual crisis today, but also the long-term ones. So today's discussion on people, power and society in the age of AI is not only important, but also very timely. And I congratulate UCL on its bicentennial and wish you many more years, many 200 more years of success. Freedom of religion, freedom of thought and expression, inclusivity and diversity are cornerstones of this institution and, of course, of human rights. 200 years ago, your founders were devoted to progressive causes, from the abolition of slavery to education for all. Among them, Jeremy Bentham was a pioneer theorist of public opinion who called for press freedom as a protection against autocracy. And I wonder what Mr. Bentham would make of social media. Digital technology is an important connector that fosters participation. Marginalized communities find their voice in online spaces. The Gen Z protests that erupted around the world last year could not have happened without online organizing. Citizen media means ordinary people can shine a light on horrific human rights violations and abuses. Human rights can thrive online, and governments are well aware of this. This is why one of the classic moves in the autocrat's playbook is to shut down the internet at the first sign of trouble. And we, as you know, in Iran in particular, during the December-January protests, that was one of the methods, and it continues to be the case even now. In Mr. Bentham's day, threats to freedom of thought and expression came from those in power, from governments that controlled access to information and the freedom to hold public gatherings. Today, those threats are exacerbated by digital technologies developing at warp speed and in ways few people truly understand. Public opinion is weaponized, public media is demonized, the act of staying informed, the duty of every responsible citizen, is monetized. Digital spaces can incubate vitriol and hate. Every woman leader that I meet tells me a story how much they experience and suffer from online harassment and abuse, and often even violent misogyny. Today, we are in a new phase of the digital revolution, the age of AI. Adverse consequences are being amplified, expanded, and augmented, and the solutions are ever more elusive. At least that's the dominant narrative. Today, I want to unpack some of these ideas, look at them from a human rights lens, and suggest that the solutions are not quite as elusive as we have been told. AI is a transformative technology that can be used to make our world safer and more peaceful and to protect our environment. AI systems are already being used to predict and prevent crises and wars. I mean, just look at even climate change issues and meteorological and weather patterns. They can supercharge progress in healthcare and education. They can solve global challenges like food insecurity and many other areas. My own office, we are using AI, and we are using different tools to help preserve indigenous languages and cultures, for example. I mean, we want to have a repository of that. We are using AI to analyze human rights violations and abuses and many other things in the broader human rights area. At the same time, hardly a day goes by without a report warnings of new harms blamed on AI systems. And let's just consider some of them. First, AI requires enormous amounts of data which incentivizes surveillance by smart appliances, by biometric access systems, and many more. This data is sold to credit rating agencies and analyzed for psychological profiling. It is used to watch us, to judge us, and to control us, often in invisible ways that we cannot challenge. Second, I'm extremely concerned by the use of AI systems in armed conflict. And there's not any armed conflict today that doesn't involve in one way or another AI tools. AI is shaping intelligent and battlefield decisions, but also exposing civilians to deadly mistakes as human control becomes remote or even non-existent. Third, AI can deepen discrimination and inequality. It serves those who can pay while excluding communities that are not deemed profitable. AI models are largely trained in English, putting speakers of other languages at an automatic disadvantage. And poor training can lead AI models to discriminate against women in all their diversity and minority groups of all kinds. Fourth, there are serious concerns that when AI is used to curate social media feeds and news aggregators, it can supercharge disinformation and dangerous content. Narratives based on outrage, on conspiracy and anger are more profitable and win out over wisdom, compassion and reason. London itself is a victim of this. It's one of the safest cities in the world, but you'd never know about this from the type of online images that you see. So don't we all want a kinder, more peaceful, more inspiring world? But why are our news feeds giving us the opposite? Fifth, and linked to this, AI can predict exactly what is needed to keep people scrolling with micro-targeting that can harm vulnerable groups. Think of teenage girls, for example, that are exposed to content that glorifies anorexia, or lonely men that are fed with extreme political views. Sixth, AI-generated deepfakes undermine our shared reality. Hyper-realistic synthetic content makes us question the evidence of our own eyes, fueling cynicism and making a mockery of fact-based debate. Remember Hannah Arendt's warning: the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is someone for whom the distinction between fact and fiction no longer exists. As you know, in psychology, this is what you could call a psychosis. The no longer being able to make the distinction between reality and your fantasy world. Seventh, AI will change the world of work. And I'm sure for those of you who aspire to go into different professions, it must be a question that you ask yourselves. There are estimates that up to 40% of jobs could be automated. But at the same time, other roles will obviously be also created, so we don't quite yet know how this will play out in the end. And finally, let's not forget the environmental impact of AI. The data centers that house AI servers suck up huge amounts of electricity and water. They rely on critical minerals and rare elements that are often mined unsustainably. And frankly, if you do a mapping of all the conflicts of today, you will see a correlation between where these natural resources are and our consumption patterns. From a human rights point of view, these are serious risks, and I'm using rights language, to our rights to life and health, to our rights to privacy and freedom of expression, to non-discrimination and political participation. AI could massively exacerbate global inequalities and affect the rights to work and to a healthy environment. I'm also deeply concerned that AI technologies could become independent of human control. And that's not just my view, but the view of many AI engineers who have warned that AI could pose a threat to humanity itself. And you all know the story, I guess, of the sorcerer's apprentice. The lesson is that we should only invoke new powers when we understand and control them. All in all, it's clear that these technologies must be managed carefully if we are to safeguard our humanity and our planet. But it's even clearer today that this is not happening as we see and look around the world. One reason for this lies in the power imbalances that underpin AI. And human rights always comes in because human rights always looks at power and the exercise of power. And let's talk about how enormous power has been amassed without any meaningful democratic control. A handful of companies in a tiny number of countries own the digital infrastructure that is essential to AI diffusion, from communication networks to cloud services. The US and China together host over 90% of global AI data center capacity in the world. Countries with dedicated compute and cloud infrastructure are excluded from some of AI's opportunities. What are AI companies and their billionaires owners doing with all this power is one question one has to ask. And how are governments incentivizing them to act for the public interest? If we're heading for a new world with fewer jobs and more leisure, where are the solutions for people who have been made redundant and are feeling excluded? What are the initiatives to deliver social services and create creative communities in a post-employment world? Where are the ideas for AI to lift 800 million people around the world out of extreme poverty, to stop climate chaos in its tracks, to tackle the epidemic of gender-based violence? In a worst-case scenario, autocratic state power and tech power converge. That's really a dystopian thing. We are already seeing this as some states monitor social media for dissent, removing inconvenient posts, or flagging dissenting users for arrest. Some use AI-driven bots to spread disinformation and amplify pro-government narratives. AI tools enable surveillance and control at a scale never seen before. Tech companies do the bidding of states while lobbying against regulations that might reduce their profits. In short, some governments and companies use AI to expand and entrench their power and to keep the rest of us in shackles, oblivious to our fate. And I just want to actually mention Immanuel Kant and his definition of the Enlightenment, because I sometimes wonder whether some of these developments would not bring us back to the pre-Enlightenment era, because as you know, Kant called the Enlightenment the exit of the human being from their self-imposed tutelage. And that's really important to understand what enlightenment means also in the context of this. Even in established democracies, AI-driven trends pose widespread concerns. Evidence is mounting that digital media correlates to increased political polarization. People's positions on one issue can be predicted from their stance on others. Ideology sets the agenda rather than facts. And I'm reminded of Elias Canetti's work on crowds and power. It's a book that I can really recommend in today's, especially today. Canetti, who some of you may know, lived through years of fascism and the Holocaust, believed that humanity was defined by a struggle between the individual, who may be powerless, and the masses, who have power, but are always at risk of groupthink and mob violence. If we transfer his thinking to today's polarized digital world, we can see the outlines of an emerging social model that we don't yet fully grasp. But it's interesting what his ideas were at the time and his analysis about that relationship. And it's really very important as we look at solutions as well. We are going through social and economic changes on the scale of the Industrial Revolution or the invention of the printing press. No one can possibly understand all the implications. So any thoughtful response must be based on humility, a clear-eyed understanding of our own limitations, but also the law of unintended consequences. We need to cherish the idea of a public good by building a pluralistic vision for technology, including AI that serves humanity by tackling the issues that really matter. We need an online world and AI tools that nurture people's full contributions and reflect the concerns and aspirations of everyone, not a chosen few. We need applications that work for those who are most in need, but cannot afford to pay. That means also looking at incentive structures that go beyond the profit motive. It means moving away from today's race to develop AI without guardrails, in which technology is advancing more quickly than its risks can be assessed and managed. I believe one of our generation's greatest challenges is to find forms of global cooperation and governance that ensure digital technologies improve people's lives. Those who are most affected by digital tools need to have a say. Because let's be clear, we control AI, it does not control us, but I have to add yet at the end. It is vital that we push back against the narrative that we are at the mercy of digital technologies in general and AI in particular, a narrative that clearly serves the financial and political interests of those who develop AI. We should also reject the false dichotomy that I often hear between innovation on the one hand and regulation on the other. Regulation is essential to innovation that works for everyone. And describing it as a brake on progress is like saying that the road safety laws impose unnecessary constraints on the car industry. I mean, I often compare this because, I mean, if you want to survive, you will have to abide by the rules and regulations of traffic. It's a bit similar here. So step by step, we need to identify risks and formulate laws and regulations with built-in transparency and accountability. We need to monitor their impact and adapt them in a timely way. It can't be hidden in secretive corners of the world. And we already have the values and principles that inform these limits that we can put on AI models. And these are the universal values of human rights which can't be denied, hidden, or ignored. And let's not forget, human rights, and we don't hear it enough, human rights encapsulate ancient wisdoms that guide us through today's challenges. These were long-worn, hard-won battles for struggle and struggles for freedom and justice. They provide senses that can navigate us through the fog of the new and the unknown. And they represent a legally binding normative framework that not only directs but unlocks all freedoms for everyone everywhere. That was the biggest revolutionary idea that we as human beings could come up with. And they set out checks and balances. They are ultimately about human agency, human dignity, and our place on our planet. They provide an inspiring vision of AI that can make our world safer, more peaceful, but also develop it through human imagination, creativity, and purpose. In short, human rights provide a governance model that is long-term and intergenerational, that links our past with our present and our future. And states have this obligation under existing law. Let's never forget this. So it is applicable also to AI development. Just to take one example, Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights sets out clear commitments on freedom of opinion and expression. These rule out incitement to hatred and blanket internet shutdowns. Or take AI-assisted weapon systems. International humanitarian and human rights law requires distinction, proportionality, and accountability standards that cannot be met without meaningful human control. So the answers are there. Human rights law protects privacy, it protects non-discrimination and more, and we already have a legally protected right to equality, which means that states should ensure that tech companies test their systems for discriminatory outcomes. And it's clear that we need to protect everyone, particularly children, from the risk of AI tools, notably addictive behaviors. The onus is on regulators, on companies, to ensure that human rights are built into the design, into the development, and the use of AI tools. And this includes solutions that protect privacy and make social media safer for all of us. We need to use existing laws to challenge the use of AI in surveillance, in predictive policing, in immigration, and other automated decision-making processes. We need effective oversight, enforcement, and remedies for victims so that people can get compensation if their rights are violated. And we need to find ways to mitigate the risks of market concentration. And it is encouraging that a number of governments and regional organizations are passing new laws to regulate AI on their territory based on human rights. For instance, Brazil's draft AI Act is a good example. The European Union has enshrined vital human rights safeguards in law, which I hope they retain in their current process. Several American states have passed laws on the use of AI in recruitment, for example. And while the current US administration has reduced regulation on AI and attacked other governments for their efforts against disinformation, it cannot escape its own role. It is now engaged in a very public battle over the use of AI in autonomous lethal weapons and mass surveillance, two deeply disturbing applications. At the international level, states have adopted a far-reaching global digital compact during this Pact for the Future negotiations, and that agrees on essential steps by governments and calls for companies to live up to their human rights responsibilities. And they have established two new mechanisms, one that was just recently adopted, an independent scientific panel that will assess risks and opportunities in the area of AI. It's a bit modeled around the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and an annual platform which will take place in July this year in Geneva to discuss AI governance. These efforts coalesce around a new way of reaching agreement on global issues, one that is constantly evolving and that goes beyond government to include tech companies and in particular also civil society. My office is directly engaging with some of the leading companies that produce generative AI, and we help in this identification process both of good and harmful practices, hoping to contribute to an environment that encourages a race to the top rather than a fight to the death. We have called for a pause in the use of AI in areas of unacceptable human rights risk until sufficient guardrails are in place. And we have urged greater integration of human rights in technical standard setting processes. Bigger, faster, better. That's the unofficial slogan of the race to build artificial general intelligence. And my suggestion is slower, kinder, and wiser. We know that the AI genie is out of the bottle and it's not going back. But what if that genie is at our service, ready to grant us 3 wishes? And so my first wish would be for AI to make the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into a reality for all people everywhere. And I challenge tech companies and governments to make this their guiding mission for AI to implement this beautiful document. Because if it were implemented in its entirety, we would see a very different world. My second wish would be for all those who care about human rights, which is the vast majority of people around the planet, to join forces. Together we are much more powerful than any tech company or any billionaire. We are creating a new initiative. We're going to give momentum to a new initiative, which is the Global Alliance for Human Rights, which aims to do just this. And we will launch it in the next few months. And I hope you and UCL will be part of it. And the third, I look forward to hearing from you in our discussion what you think should be the wishes to the genie. We know how much AI can open our minds to what is possible. It should inspire us to make us big think, but we need to lift our eyes above the horizon and take ownership of our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such a rich, thoughtful and inspiring lecture. It was absolutely wonderful. It was great to hear such a rich talk on the opportunities and challenges of AI, the importance of regulation of artificial intelligence and technology more generally, but also the importance of human rights as the framework that can guide us in addressing the challenges and dealing with the opportunities. The format of the event from now on, I will ask a couple of questions on the basis of the lecture so that we start the discussion, a bit of a discussion with the High Commissioner, and then we will invite the audience to participate, ask your questions, think about the third wish that you want from the genie. We also have an online audience, a larger online audience, but we cannot take questions from the online audience. They are just listening. I saw your. I did wonder when you asked what would Mr. Bentham think. I did wonder about going to ask Mr. Bentham. You know, we have him in the campus, but instead I went to one of my colleagues in the Bentham project, Tim Kauser, and I asked him what would Mr. Bentham think of social media, and he told me that he would be on it all the time, having fights with people, and that he would use it but more seriously, that he would use it as an avenue for questioning authority, an instance of a public opinion tribunal. So this shows the opportunities of social media, for instance, but I thought I'd contribute to what Mr. Bentham would do. In terms of, there are so many issues that you raise, so many questions we could discuss. And first of all, I wondered, since we have several, obviously, students here online and elsewhere who will watch the lecture afterwards, what advice you'd have to give to young people on all the misinformation, disinformation that there is online. How should they start thinking about it? When I was a student, we could only read the news on some newspapers, listen to TV, various networks. Nowadays, I don't know where, I ask our students at times, where do you read the news? How do you know what's right and wrong? What is true and false? So what advice would you give them on this? And a related question, as you're thinking about that, is how do you avoid what you described as groupthink? How do you avoid this nowadays? Here at UCL, we discourage them greatly from using, in the assessment, we don't use AI, we don't let students use AI at all, because we try to show to them how important it is to think critically, to think independently. But it's very hard with social media. So what advice would you give? What thoughts do you have on this?
Look, on disinformation, I remember the COVID period. I was in New York at the time, and you probably remember it as well, because you could see an enormous amount of misinformation, sometimes very dangerous misinformation about the type of things that people should do in order to not catch COVID or drink all kinds of substances and do all kinds of things that were absolutely mad. I think one of the ways within the United Nations we try to approach precisely this issue is actually to be a source of information that is reliable. Because you have, of course, and that's where I sometimes fear when I see the attacks against the institutions that are bound by the right to truth and evidence and facts, that they are sometimes demonized in today. They are called global elitists. None of us have anything got to do with global elitism. We are actually part and parcel of societies around the world, and that's one of these misconceptions. But I do think that institutions, WHO for health, for example, when it comes to health issues, the humanitarian world, the human rights world, the many studies, the most amazing data sets that you get is actually from the UN system, because they not only analyze what's going on at the local and national level, but also at the regional and the global level, of course also with governments. And we have very strict methodological criteria when we issue something, and we issue reports, for example, and studies. It's a bit the same rigor that you have in the academic world. So I think we need to make sure that, first of all, you check your sources, you don't believe everything that you see online. But I do think that I hope that younger people will probably more than others have this agency of finding out what works, what doesn't work, what is true, what is not true. But I do fear that there are psychological warfare techniques being used that actually brainwash us. And we should be very much aware of it. So the opposite to brainwashing is being mindful, being extremely critical, but also finding out which sources we can trust, which sources we cannot, and question what you see online, basically, and develop a literacy. I mean, it's almost developing another type of ability to discern what is incredibly important. I am very worried about the polarization because I think we see our societies around the world becoming ever more polarized. There is nobody who can, I mean, and that's the groupthink phenomenon, because if you think only within your bubble, like groupthink was not necessarily a phenomenon online, it was a phenomenon that we had before in the offline world. But that, of course, gets amplified enormously, and identity politics come in the online world. And what does it? I mean, it reduces us to one characteristic. I mean, there's a fantastic book by Amartya Sen, Identity and Violence. It's a small book that he published, probably now 20 years ago, because he talks about these reductionist view of an individual. Because we all have multiple identities, we all have multiple opinions, and we all have, we also need, precisely for the creative process, this dialogue with ourselves, but then with the outside world as well, and to reach out to those where we know their views may not necessarily be aligned with ours, and to listen them and hear them out. And that, I think, we have lost. We don't have public space anymore. We can have these real robust discussions that are possible. And I think the polarization leads to the extremes becoming almost impenetrable borders that you cannot reach the other one anymore. And that is very dangerous for any society. But I also think that the vast majority of people do not want a world like this.
Great. I was thinking this is also something we talk to our students a lot about, and particularly at UCL that has a long tradition, as you said, on free speech. The importance of speaking, obviously, but also listening to the others. Even if you find their views upsetting or even offensive, just listen and try to engage in a debate, in a discussion. Don't just join your own group who all think the same. Just listen to others and debate things, and you may well find that you agree on much more than you thought initially. A very different issue, and then I will open it up to the audience because I'm sure you also have a lot of questions, is you mentioned jobs and the role of AI in relation to jobs. You said there may be new jobs, there certainly will be new jobs for people who are knowledgeable on how to use AI. I'm sure that this will be really crucial in the future. What can we do? A concern many people, including you generally, a concern that many of us have is that those who are worst off, the most disadvantaged people, the poorest workers, the most precarious workers, may be affected more by being even more disadvantaged, losing jobs, being replaced by AI. Is that a real concern, and what can we do about it? So jobs and AI, the right to work of people who are the most disadvantaged, the poorest in society. How should we think about that? Is it a real concern? What can we do about it?
No, I think the world of work is going to change. Is changing as we speak, but it's going to change massively. Again, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of debate around green transition. How we get out of the fossil fuel industry and the addiction to fossil fuel industry into a world where you basically move into renewable energy, into different models of even economic models, quite frankly. One of the big things was always, how does it affect the world of work? And there were a lot of studies that were then done that actually showed that it's of course never sort of the same type of, you will see some jobs disappear, but you will see other jobs create, and it may not always tally exactly. But nonetheless, that's actually the type of analysis that we have to do now. I think it's almost like a long-term strategic visioning of what are the possible scenarios that will evolve in the world of work, because certain jobs will probably disappear. I mean, even within the UN system, I was wondering how interpretation and translation will happen in the future, for example, to give you that. So those who have those gifts will probably work on other issues and bring out their creativity in those areas. But that's the challenge that I put also to the developers of these things. You need to think of all the consequences, and the human rights framing allows you to think of what you develop, who is going to be affected, and not just one risk, safety risk. No, it goes into the whole spectrum of governance, including the right to work. So I think you almost need to do this human rights due diligence analysis in the design and the development of AI and see, okay, what's the implication for the environment? What's the implication for the world of work? And what could potentially be solutions to it? But I don't see this. What I see is huge enthusiasm, which I understand. But enthusiasm, at some stage it will give in to reality. Yeah. And then it may be too late.
This is great. Yes, I have several questions more here, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people in the audience. If you don't mind, first of all, I don't know whether the mic situation, if you don't mind introducing yourselves before asking.
I don't know if it's working.
Yes. Yeah, it's working.
Thank you very much and for organizing this. My name is Francesca Fanucci and I'm based here in London, but I work for a European Human Rights Organization, European Centre for Not-for-Profit Law, ECNL in The Hague. And we have been doing a lot of advocacy towards better human rights compliant regulation, both in Europe and at the Council of Europe. And I wanted to share with you and ask your opinion about two challenges that we have often faced. One is what we believe is a bit of the elephant in the room still when we talk about the impact of AI on human rights, and that is the impact on environment. Because, for example, even when we talk about the most immediate impact that we discuss, discrimination, the response that we get from policymakers and industry alike is that, oh yes, we need a better data set, we need more inclusive data, we need better quality. But the processing of the data, the gathering of the data that entails creating data centers and churning out models has an impact that we tried at least to put it on the table, but it's very much swept under the carpet. And even at regulatory level, we tried to introduce it. I mean, we fought so hard to have a right to a healthy environment recognized, and that's just about it. But now talking about environmental impact and how to mitigate it as part and parcel of the impact assessment is not. So first challenge. Second challenge, even where countries, either at national or regional level, sit at the table and accept to introduce some sort of regulation, they carve out huge blanket exemptions on sectoral areas like national security. As you may be aware, the EU AI Act has a blanket exemptions for AI on national security. The Convention of the Council of Europe, that is global on AI, has an exemption, a blanket exemption on national security. The UK is considering a law that is going to be vertical, not even horizontal, and they are not considering national security. Last but not least, we have examples where Spain, Serbia, the Netherlands, even they try to squeeze under the national security exemptions algorithms that have nothing to do with it, like use for welfare. So my question would be, how does your mandate relate to that? Obviously, you must be aware of this. And how could we maybe cooperate as civil society and students to put a joint pressure on the governments that seem to listen more to the arguments of fast innovation, quick bucks for economy rise, rather than the concerns of us all? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we take a couple, 2-3 questions maybe? I saw another hand around here, so let's take another question and then yours. So we'll take 3 together and then another 3.
I'm Aitan Monet. I'm a high school student in Texas. I had a question about data sovereignty. As the US and China have 90% of data server capacity, they're creating most of the models anyway. How do you balance other countries needing access to their own? Is this an open model, like APIs that the Chinese are producing? And if so, how do you have the architecture include human rights? You mentioned that the architectures have to have human rights principles embedded. How do you enforce that?
Thank you very much. We take a third question, and then there will be another round.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I wrote down my question so I won't forget it. Big tech firms are able to leverage market power in such a way that they offer a digital infrastructure which is now too big to fail. We depend on them and vice versa, and in a way we also own them. It's our inputs that we feed them with. Chatting with ChatGPT or copyright protected goods such as art or the creation of knowledge. Would you say it's time to expropriate big tech firms in order to democratically organize them by and for the people? Because, I mean, like the streets that we walk on, I can use them, you know? So why are we not at a point where we think about democratically organizing such firms? Which control us also in a way. Thank
you. Yeah, how are you feeling? Do you want to take?
We can take more.
Okay, let us take one more. I think I saw your hand here. And
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Very insightful lecture. My name is Olga Croft. I'm not a lawyer, again here. I'm a management consultant. I'm specializing in business transformation, and AI governance is a big concern, a big interest. My question is, artificial intelligence as a science existed from 1950s. People of my generation, we studied it in unis in last century. Why it came as such a surprise to an institution like United Nations that all of a sudden there is a risk and requires the urgent governance? ChatGPT just simply put those tools, as I call it, on the high street, like ticky marks of AI tools. So, but it exists in a broader context. And the fact is, for instance, I'm not sure what's the latest statistic, 2 years ago I was in Geneva, and I've learned that a lot of United Nations institutions, they digitize only 80% of their archives. What it means, effectively, data which are available in the public domain are highly skewed to these information which put voluntary by the people who use social media and all this sort of stuff. Is it something on your radar, your concern, and something that can be done? Thank you.
okay, one final question from this round there, and then we'll take more questions.
And my question is, one of the organizations I work with is specifically focused on a global alliance working towards issues of like transnational importance that have to do with AI governance. And my question is, in examples of transnational issues which are as a result of AI, such as like misinformation campaigns which have geopolitical impacts, or the possibility of bad actors using AI in one country to then create harmful impacts in another, if each country has their own governance strategies that may differ or be in conflict with the AI strategy of other countries, as we're already seeing with like the US and the EU, for example, how should these transnational problems be tackled?
A very broad range of questions. Great, thank you very much. Do you like to address them, and then we'll take more questions?
Yes. Great. Good questions. Look, the impact on the environment, as I mentioned, I mean, it's one that is probably very hidden, but I was very happy to see that I mentioned this Global Alliance for Human Rights, right? And we had, with our own colleagues in the my own innovation hub, we developed a little AI tool to help us on that front. And then we tested it with interns, with our young colleagues. And the first question, they immediately said, you cannot do this without an environmental impact assessment. And that was, I was very happy to hear this. So we now have, we actually show what type of energy it would use. And I think that's, well, we have the same on, when it comes to aviation, for example, where the CO2 emissions of trains, of cars, when we fly. And I think that realization is a good start. And I really hope that the more there is knowledge about it, that indeed it would lead this really power that comes from consumers and from people who at the end of the day will have to suffer the consequences. And this is often, well, the younger generation and future generations. And that's why it's incredibly important to do this. I sometimes wonder if in 50 years down the line, people would write about our time. And I go back to this book by Naomi Oreskes on Merchants of Doubt. I don't know if you have... Oh, sorry, need to probably put... Yeah, no, there is this book it's called Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes, and there's a co-author that I can't remember now. But what she showed was the impact that the tobacco industry and the fossil fuel industry had on influencing politics and governance in a way that would not show the harm that it does. And they knew already that tobacco industry, of course, is harmful on the right to health, the same with the fossil fuel industry. And we lost decades on that front. Because it was, frankly, a strong coalition between, again, not big tech, but big companies and very strong and the industrial complex of sorts that did not want these truths to come out, and we are in the world where we are in. For me, it's a question even of accountability and transitional justice at some stage. And I think there will be, we see the discussion around ecocide, for example, even for the statute for the Rome Statute to be amended, and these are important discussions to have. So I think it's about, again, political momentum that needs to be created to bring this up and on the table, and the same on the regulation issues. My office was supposed to come up with a digital advisory service for pro-technological developments. It was included in the Global Digital Compact. We have not got any funding for it, which shows you how much it is not a priority, because precisely that the idea would have been, we want to advise companies, regulators, but also governments, and we have a lot of requests, especially from countries in the Global South who want help from us of how you regulate companies who want to do the right thing. But we don't even have the resources for it. And it wouldn't cost that much, because we could just connect all the academics that are working on this, all the experts, the civil society, into a big alliance to provide this type of services. But it also shows, when billions are made every day, when it comes to the human rights impact, it is not taken as a political priority. And I would hope that we can work more on this so that it is actually seen as something that needs to happen. Which is why you probably get these blanket exemptions on certain grounds, because there isn't enough political momentum that is created and democratized enough for it to be a public discussion that could take place. On data sovereignty and enforcement, enforcement is the problem. We don't have a governance system, to be honest. You would need, like on climate change, where you had the scientific panel coming up with very clear predictions, or with at least the science and the evidence, and then the Paris Agreement that happened on climate change, and then these nationally determined contributions, which we know are not big enough. But you have a process of at least a process of governance that includes countries and has a formula that deals with it, you need something similar. You need similar governance, global governance ideas around AI and technological developments, because yes, otherwise it will be in the hands of very few people who can exercise that power. And I hope with the AI scientific panel that I mentioned, that was just these 40 individuals, they will come up with their first report over the summer. There will be the AI for Good Summit and the dialogue on AI governance in July in Geneva. And I really hope that, it's not going to be a niche issue discussed somewhere among experts, but there is a lot of, and all those who are interested in these topics, you need to find out where are these global discussions taking place and bring your voice in. I was at the AI summit, the first ever AI summit that took place in the Global South in India earlier in February. Very important because the topic was democratization of AI, precisely what you have mentioned, and also showing the limitations of what currently happens. But democratically organizing it means that you need to have the push from populations at large. You need the mindfulness around it, you need the political momentum, you need the mobilization. And I hope that, with civil society and more awareness, especially among young people, that becomes a political force to reckon with in this debate. Because, fully agree, we should see it as a global public good. We should see it as a public good because, of course, some of the technological developments were actually, if you look at the web, at the invention of the web, it came from public funding. Some of the things that we are benefiting from were actually publicly funded. They were taxpayers' money. But then it gets privatized, and some people make huge amounts of money out of it. So we need to take back that space, and not give only the power to a few that are allowed to do whatever they want. And I think that's where we are in the current moment. We have the amassing of power in non-state actors that have bigger budgets than some countries around the world, that have no democratic control of any sort, where they can exercise this power without any of us being part of it. But they're also using our data, and they're using all the things that we produce without the guarantees and the guardrails that are behind it. And I think, and I think that's on archives. Of course, digitalization is extremely important. There's no doubt about it. It's often a money issue for us, to be honest. Our own digital transformation is suffering from not getting enough funding for it. I think that, and on the transnational side, as I mentioned, you do need it at a global level. You can, we see these regional models, EU. We see a couple of, as I mentioned, Brazil adopting an AI Act, but at the same time, you need a global standard setting that allows it to be covered. And I hope with the AI governance dialogue that progress can be made already in July.
Next round of questions, and we'll conclude. We have about 10 minutes.
Hi, I am Purva. I am a master's student at UCL Faculty of Laws. My question to you is, when we talk about the regulation of AI, especially when the stakeholders are involved, the industry leaders would rather vouch for a self-regulation mechanism instead of binding regulations from the state or the governments. In that light, especially when the idea of tech exceptionalism is promoted a lot by industry leaders, how do you think can countries ensure and governing bodies ensure that human rights impact assessments become a legal and binding part of AI development and use instead of them just being guiding principles? Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the great talk. I'm Marta Stolze from Free University Berlin, I share many of your skepticisms and aspirations, but to stay on the gloomy side of things, what is the power human rights still carry? So, how to get to human rights-guided AI development by big tech and used by states, especially in a world with increased questioning of the framework itself of human rights or blatant actions against them being undertaken by key states. So what are the incentives or available sanctions for big tech? How to ensure that a global alliance for human rights does not remain merely aspirational? Thank you.
So, okay, one final question, and then we'll.
Hope is a good one. We had heard from people while you were walking up the stairs that you were in. I just arrived here yesterday, so Whitehall, right, talking to members of Parliament or something. So perhaps on the more optimistic side, what do you see, and what is the realpolitik of advocating for human rights writ large or working with members of Parliament? How did it go today, and what is that like?
That was a good one. Okay, great. So unless there is any very, very pressing question, I think we will have to give back to the High Commissioner the opportunity to respond.
Okay. There is a big issue that those who are in the area of technological developments, and if you look at state structures and institutions, that we are not, even in international organizations, we are not being able to pay the money that you need in order to attract the type of people who would actually know what is going on. So we are always lagging behind. That's the problem here. If you look at civil service, be it at the national level or at the international level, we cannot compete. So we are not going to get the ones who are at the forefront of this type of developments, which means, as a result, that we need to, and we have actually a BTEC project. Peggy, my director for thematic engagement, is here, Peggy Hicks. They have, my colleagues have built up with the big tech companies a project, engaged with them to make them also aware that there is a declaration on business and human rights where they are accountable under human rights law for the type of things they're doing. So there is an accountability issue. The one thing where you have some way of influencing things is through accountability. Because if things go wrong, and we have seen things go wrong, look at situation in a number of conflicts where hate speech and incitement to violence led or was a contributing factor to massive human rights violations. Myanmar is a good example, also Ethiopia, and so forth. Questions about accountability will arise. So we see that then there is this type of engagement. We have, for instance, done a taxonomy of risks for the big tech companies when it comes to developing AI. We have this taxonomy of risks. It's not that these things need to be invented. They are actually there. But there are those who choose to be part of it, and there are the others who couldn't care less. So there you need the state to come in and say, sorry, we expect this from you. And that needs to be, there needs to be global consensus around this. And I think it is, because frankly, human rights are not just, all countries in the world have these obligations. So it's not something that is discretionary, it's actually compulsory. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I would consider customary international law, for the lawyers among you. It's binding on states. And I think, as we saw on climate change, the judiciary catches up eventually. Look at all the decisions that are taken now on environmental impact assessments on climate change issues. We had very famous the International Court of Justice with its advisory opinion on climate change, which was brought in, by the way, there were young people behind it. It was in the Pacific. Young people in the Pacific, Vanuatu and so forth, they lobbied very hard, their governments, that they would bring it to the General Assembly to ask for an advisory opinion on the human rights impact, human rights and and the international legal obligations and climate change. But what you will see in the advisory opinion, there is a lot about human rights law. The same with the court decision in the inter-American system, in the European Convention on Human Rights system. So you have a number of very important judicial decisions on climate change. You will see a lot more coming from the judiciary that will actually go precisely in these issues. And frankly, the law is there to be used, and it will be used. I mean, we see already a number of court cases here in the UK, as I understand it. So the incentives, I mean, what are the incentives? I mean, the incentives are, it's a bit Mariana Mazzucato's mission economy, no? How do you fill economic systems with a vision? I mean, so that you move away from a pure profit-based type of approach. And I think the consumers have a lot of power and the employees have a lot of power. You never should underestimate. I mean, I hear this from CEOs all around the world when the employees that they have and the consumers make it clear what they expect, you exercise power. And as long as we don't yet have the global regulation that we all hope to achieve, that power is in your hands, everyone's hands. We should not feel powerless. And I think sometimes we are told that we are powerless, but we are not, especially on these things. And I think we need to take that power back. And the last point, it's interesting in the current discussion more generally, including in politics, that sometimes there is a lot of misinformation about even human rights these days. They are not an ideology, despite the fact that some say they are. They are not part of any political thing. They, as I mentioned before, they are hard-won battles that were struggles for freedom that lasted for centuries. And yes, we can never take for granted what we have achieved today. And that's why I think for each and every generation, it's a new battle. Because as we see, even some of the basic concepts of what we thought would never be questioned are being questioned. But that's part of the political struggle, and we should never, ever allow anyone to take away or to make human rights something that is radioactive or an irritant or dirty. It's exactly the opposite. It's been one of the biggest transformational ideas in history, and it has given us the freedoms that we benefit from in our daily lives. And we should never, ever allow politics to cloud our minds about that. And I think that's also the message that I have to the political and economic leaders in the world today.
This is brilliant. Will you join me in thanking the High Commissioner? Thank you very much for such a brilliant talk and for engaging so charitably and so well with our questions. I also wanted to thank our colleagues from the Human Rights Institute, Christina Giannakopoulou, who helped set up the whole event, and the High Commissioner's colleagues, his great team, Peggy and Alison, who are here today. Thank you very, very much. Thank you all for joining us also. And there's tea and biscuits outside. The High Commissioner will have to go, unfortunately, but a lot of us will stay. So join us for tea after the event. Thanks very much for joining. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you again.
Thank you.